The morning started like any other Tuesday, but by noon everything had changed. Lisa stood outside the small apartment building on Maple Street, holding a crumpled piece of paper that would change her life forever. The eviction notice felt heavy in her hands, even though it was just a single sheet. 3 years ago, this place had been her fresh start. The one-bedroom apartment wasn't fancy, but it had good light coming through the kitchen window and neighbors who smiled when they passed in the hallway. She'd painted the walls a soft yellow and hung pictures of her family everywhere. It felt like home. But homes can disappear faster than you think. Lisa was 28 years old and had always been the responsible one in her family. She worked as a substitute teacher at the local elementary school, filling in whenever regular teachers got sick or needed time off. The pay wasn't great, but she loved working with kids. Their energy and curiosity made even the hardest days feel worthwhile. Everything changed when her mom got sick. It started with small things. Her mother would forget where she put her keys or struggle to remember the names of old friends. Then came the doctor visits, the tests, and finally the word that turned their world upside down: cancer. The treatments were expensive. Even with insurance, the bills kept coming. Chemotherapy sessions twice a week. Prescription medications that cost more than Lisa's monthly grocery budget. Special foods that her mom could actually keep down when she felt too sick to eat regular meals. Lisa had savings. She'd been careful with money her whole life, putting away a little bit from each paycheck. But cancer doesn't care about your savings account. The money disappeared faster than she ever thought possible. First, she used up everything in her savings. Then she started picking up extra work wherever she could find it. She cleaned houses on weekends and worked at a local diner on Friday nights. Some weeks she was working 7 days without a break, but it still wasn't enough. Her mom needed her during the treatments. Someone had to drive her to the hospital and sit with her during the long hours of chemotherapy. Someone had to help her when she felt too weak to stand up or too sick to make herself something to eat. Lisa couldn't abandon her mother, but she also couldn't keep up with all her bills. The rent started falling behind first. Just 1 month, she told herself. She'd catch up next month when she got more substitute teaching work. But then her mom had complications and needed to stay in the hospital for 2 weeks. Lisa took unpaid leave to be with her, and suddenly she was 2 months behind. Her landlord, Mr. Peterson, had been understanding at first. He was an older man who owned 3 small apartment buildings in town. He'd known Lisa since she moved in and had always thought she was a good tenant. She kept the place clean, never threw loud parties, and always paid her bills on time. "I know you're going through a hard time," he'd said when she first asked for extra time. "Family comes first. We'll work something out." But months passed and the money situation only got worse. Lisa's mom needed more treatments, new medications, time in a special care facility when she became too weak to stay at home alone. 3 months behind rent became 4. Then 5. Mr. Peterson's patience started wearing thin. He had his own bills to pay and his own family to take care of. The apartment building wasn't just his business, it was how he made his living. "I'm sorry, Lisa," he said during their last conversation. "I really am. But I can't carry you anymore. I've got property taxes due and repairs that need to be made. I have to start the eviction process." The legal papers came 2 weeks later. She had 30 days to pay everything she owed or move out. Lisa tried everything. She applied for loans, but her credit was already damaged from missing other payments. She asked family members for help, but everyone was struggling with their own problems. Her brother had just lost his job, and her sister was dealing with her own family crisis. She even tried to sell everything valuable she owned. Her grandmother's jewelry, her laptop, even her car. But it still wasn't enough to cover months of back rent. The 30 days passed like a blur. Now here she was, standing on the sidewalk with that eviction notice, watching strangers carry her furniture out of the building. The sheriff's deputy stood nearby, making sure everything stayed calm and legal. He seemed nice enough, but Lisa could tell he'd done this many times before. For him, it was just another Tuesday at work. For her, it was the worst day of her life. Her few belongings looked even smaller sitting on the curb. A couch that had belonged to her grandmother. A kitchen table she'd bought at a garage sale and refinished herself. Boxes of books and photo albums. Everything that had made the apartment feel like home now looked like what it really was, just stuff. The hardest part was seeing her neighbors watch from their windows. Some looked sympathetic, but others just seemed curious about the drama happening right outside their front doors. Lisa felt exposed, like everyone could see how badly she'd failed at managing her life. She'd always been proud. Growing up, her family didn't have much money, but they always paid their bills and kept their promises. Her parents taught her that your word was your bond, and that good people always found a way to take care of themselves. Standing there watching her life get packed into boxes, Lisa felt like she'd let everyone down. Her parents, her grandparents, even herself. The worst part was that her mom was getting better. The treatments had worked. The cancer was in remission, and the doctors said she had a good chance of making a full recovery. All those months of sacrifice and struggle had been worth it, but now, just when things should have been getting better, Lisa had lost everything. Light rain started falling as the moving truck pulled away. The drops were small at first, just enough to make the pavement look shiny. But Lisa could feel the storm getting stronger. The clouds overhead were dark and heavy, promising the kind of rain that soaks through your clothes and makes everything feel cold and miserable. She looked at her phone to check the time and saw 17 missed calls from her mom. Lisa hadn't told her about the eviction. How could she explain that while her mom was fighting for her life, Lisa had lost the battle to keep them both afloat? The rain was getting heavier now. Lisa pulled her jacket tighter and tried to figure out what to do next. She had about $47 in her purse and a car with a quarter tank of gas. She'd applied to rent a few other places, but landlords wanted first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit up front. Even the cheapest apartments in town wanted more money than she had. For the first time in her life, Lisa truly understood what it meant to have nowhere to go. The rain kept falling, and she stood there on the sidewalk, holding everything she had left in a single worn-out purse, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. The rain was coming down harder now, and Lisa knew she had to do something. Standing on the sidewalk wasn't going to solve anything, but she felt frozen in place. Everything had happened so fast that her brain couldn't quite catch up with reality. She walked back toward the apartment building, hoping maybe she could talk to Mr. Peterson one more time. Maybe if she explained about her mom getting better, maybe if she promised to pay everything back with interest, maybe he would give her just a little more time. The building's front door was still propped open from all the moving. Lisa could hear voices coming from upstairs, Mr. Peterson talking to someone about getting the apartment ready for the next tenant. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. Her apartment door was wide open. The place looked so empty without her furniture that it seemed like a completely different space. The yellow walls she'd painted so carefully now looked faded and sad. There were dark spots on the carpet where her couch had been and tiny holes in the walls where she'd hung her pictures. Mr. Peterson was standing in the middle of the living room with a clipboard, making notes about what needed to be fixed before the next person moved in. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. "Lisa," he said, and she could hear the discomfort in his voice. "I thought you'd already left." "Mr. Peterson, please," she started, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know I owe you a lot of money, but my mom is getting better now. The treatments worked. I can start picking up more work, and I promise I'll pay back every penny. I just need a little more time." He set down his clipboard and looked at her with tired eyes. Mr. Peterson was in his 60s, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes that came from years of dealing with difficult situations like this one. "Lisa, we've had this conversation before," he said, but not unkindly. "I gave you extra time. Multiple times. I understand you were in a tough spot with your mom being sick, but I can't keep carrying you. I've got my own bills to pay. I know, but just one more month. I swear I can get caught up if you just give me one more month. You said that 3 months ago. And 2 months ago. And last month." He picked up his clipboard again. "I'm sorry, but it's done. The eviction is final." Lisa felt something breaking apart inside her chest. "Please, I don't have anywhere else to go." "That's not my problem anymore," Mr. Peterson said, and now his voice was getting harder. "You should have thought about that before you stopped paying rent." "I never stopped trying to pay. I gave you everything I could. Not everything. You could have gotten a second job sooner. You could have asked family for help earlier. You could have made different choices." The words hit Lisa like physical blows. Part of her knew he was frustrated and probably didn't mean to be so harsh, but another part of her felt the unfairness of it all. She had worked extra jobs. She had asked for help. She had made every sacrifice she could think of. "You don't understand," she said, and now she was getting emotional too. "My mom was dying. I had to take care of her. I couldn't just abandon her to work more hours. And I understand that, Mr. Peterson replied. But understanding doesn't pay my mortgage or fix the broken furnace in Building 2. I'm running a business here, not a charity. Lisa felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry in front of him, but the stress of the whole day was catching up with her. I'm begging you, she said quietly. Just a few more weeks? I'll sign whatever papers you want. I'll pay extra fees, anything. Mr. Peterson's face got red. Enough, I've heard enough excuses from you to last a lifetime. Every month it's something new. Your mom's treatments, your car broke down, you got sick. The school cut your hours. There's always something. Those weren't excuses. Those were real things that happened. I don't care anymore, he shouted, and his voice echoed in the empty apartment. I'm done listening to your sob stories. You're out. That's final. Lisa took a step back, shocked by how angry he'd gotten. In all the months they'd talked about her rent problems, he'd never raised his voice like that. You need to leave now, he continued, pointing toward the door. You're trespassing. I just wanted to talk. You're trespassing, he repeated louder this time. Get out before I call the police. Lisa stood there for a moment, not believing this was really happening. The man who'd been understanding and patient for months had suddenly turned into someone she didn't recognize. Fine, she said quietly. I'll go. But as she turned to leave, something inside her snapped. All the stress, all the fear, all the unfairness of the situation came pouring out. You know what? She said, turning back around. You're right. I did make choices. I chose to take care of my dying mother instead of letting her suffer alone. I chose to be there for someone I loved instead of just thinking about money. And if I had to do it again, I'd make the same choice every time. Mr. Peterson's face got even redder. Don't you dare try to make me feel guilty for running my business properly. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I'm just telling you the truth. Some things are more important than money. Not when it's my money you're talking about. It wasn't like I was spending your money on vacation or fancy clothes. I was trying to save my mother's life. I don't care what you were spending it on. Rent is rent. They were both shouting now, and Lisa could hear doors opening in other apartments as neighbors came out to see what all the noise was about. You have no idea what I've been through, Lisa said, and now she was crying openly. You sit in your office collecting checks while other people's lives fall apart. That's enough. Mr. Peterson moved toward her, his face dark with anger. Get out of my building right now. I'm going. Lisa shot back, but she was moving too slowly for his liking. That's when everything went wrong. Mr. Peterson grabbed her arm just above the elbow and started pushing her toward the door. His grip was tighter than necessary, and Lisa stumbled as he forced her forward. Let go of me, she said, trying to pull away, but he didn't let go. Instead, he kept pushing her toward the stairs, moving faster than she could keep up with. Lisa's feet got tangled up and she nearly fell. By the time they reached the front door of the building, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors stood on their porches and looked out their windows. A few people on the street had stopped to watch the commotion. Don't ever come back here, Mr. Peterson said, giving her one final push that sent her stumbling onto the sidewalk. Lisa's purse fell from her shoulder and hit the wet pavement hard. The zipper broke open and everything inside scattered across the street. Her wallet, her keys, her phone, loose coins, old receipts, and dozens of pictures of her mom fell into the rain and mud. She dropped to her knees on the wet asphalt, frantically trying to gather up her belongings before they got completely soaked. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely pick anything up. The neighbors and strangers just stood there watching, but nobody moved to help her. Lisa had never felt so alone in her entire life. 20 miles outside of town, Tom Williams was having the kind of day that made him grateful for the simple life he'd chosen. The sun had been shining when he started work that morning, and his cattle were healthy and content in their pastures. At 35 years old, Tom had learned to appreciate days when everything went according to plan. His ranch wasn't the biggest in the county, but it was his. 500 acres of rolling hills and green pastures that had belonged to his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had started with just 50 acres and a handful of cattle back in the 1940s. His father had expanded the operation and built the modest farmhouse, where Tom still lived. Tom had inherited the place 2 years ago when his father passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. It was a hard time, losing the man who'd taught him everything about ranching and life in general, but working the land helped him deal with the grief. There was something healing about taking care of animals and watching grass grow and feeling connected to something bigger than yourself. Most days, Tom worked alone except for his border collie, Rex, who was better at herding cattle than most people. Tom liked the quiet and the routine. Up before dawn to check on the animals, fix whatever needed fixing, and end the day tired but satisfied. He wasn't antisocial. He had friends in town and went to church on Sundays and helped his neighbors when they needed an extra hand. But Tom had always been more comfortable with animals than people. Animals were straightforward. They didn't lie or pretend to be something they weren't. You treated them well and they trusted you. It was simple. People were more complicated. Tom had learned that lesson the hard way a few years back when he'd been engaged to a woman named Jennifer, who seemed perfect on the surface. She was beautiful and charming and said all the right things about wanting a simple life in the country, but it turned out she was more interested in the idea of ranch life than the reality of it. When she realized that ranching meant getting up early and working hard and sometimes going days without seeing other people, she changed her mind pretty quickly. She broke off the engagement and moved to the city, leaving Tom with a valuable lesson about paying attention to what people did rather than what they said. Since then, Tom had kept mostly to himself. He dated occasionally but never seriously. Most women his age wanted things he couldn't offer: fancy restaurants and weekend trips and the kind of excitement that only came from city life. Tom was content with his quiet existence, and he'd stopped trying to convince anyone else that it was worthwhile. On this particular Tuesday, Tom had spent the morning moving cattle from one pasture to another. It was routine work, but it required attention and patience. Cattle had their own ideas about where they wanted to go, and rushing them never worked out well. By noon, he'd finished the job and loaded his truck with supplies for repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in last week's storm. The feed store in town had the posts and wire he needed, so he'd made the 30-minute drive to pick everything up. Tom didn't go to town very often, once or twice a month for supplies and groceries, and that was usually enough to last him until the next trip. He preferred to get everything done at once rather than making multiple trips. The feed store owner, Bill Martinez, was an old friend of Tom's father. He always took his time loading Tom's truck and catching up on local news. Tom learned that the Johnson family's youngest daughter had gotten married, that Mrs. Peterson had won first prize at the county fair for her apple pie, and that the high school football team was having their best season in years. "You should come to the game Friday night," Bill suggested as they loaded the last fence post. "Whole town turns out. It's a good time." Tom nodded politely but didn't commit to anything. He liked Bill and appreciated the invitation, but sitting in bleachers making small talk with people he barely knew wasn't his idea of a good time. After the feed store, Tom stopped at the grocery store for a few essentials: bread, milk, coffee, and the ingredients for the simple meals he cooked for himself. He wasn't much of a cook, but he could manage the basics. The rain started while he was in the store. Tom could hear it drumming on the roof as he waited in line to pay. By the time he got back to his truck, it was coming down pretty steadily. Tom didn't mind driving in the rain. His truck had good tires and four-wheel drive, and he knew the roads around here better than anyone. He took his time, keeping his speed down and his headlights on. He was driving through the older part of town where the houses were smaller and closer together when he saw the commotion up ahead. There were people standing around on the sidewalk and in their front yards, all looking at something happening near one of the apartment buildings. Tom's first thought was that there might have been an accident. He slowed down to see if anyone needed help. That's when he saw the woman on the ground. She was kneeling in the middle of the wet street, frantically trying to pick up things that had scattered everywhere. Papers, coins, what looked like photographs. Her hair was soaked from the rain, and even from a distance, Tom could see that she was crying. There was an older man standing on the sidewalk yelling at her, and a small crowd of people watching like it was some kind of entertainment. But nobody was helping her. Tom felt something twist in his stomach. He'd seen plenty of difficult situations in his life, but there was something about this scene that hit him wrong. The woman looked so small and helpless kneeling there in the rain, and the man shouting at her seemed way out of line. His grandmother had raised him to believe that real strength meant protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. She'd been a tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she'd had the biggest heart of anyone Tom had ever known. She'd taken in stray animals, helped struggling neighbors, and never turned away anyone who needed a meal or a place to stay. "Tommy," she used to say, "the measure of a man isn't how tough he is when he's strong. It's how gentle he is when someone else is weak. Looking at this woman in the street, Tom heard his grandmother's voice as clearly, as if she were sitting right next to him in the truck. He pulled over to the curb and turned. Off the engine, Tom wasn't the kind of person who looked for trouble or tried to insert himself into other people's business, but he also wasn't the kind of person who could drive past someone who clearly needed help. He sat in his truck for a moment, watching the scene unfold. The woman was still trying to gather her belongings, but the rain was making everything worse. Papers were getting soaked and torn. Coins were rolling into the storm drains, and still, nobody was helping her. The older man was still yelling something about trespassing and calling the police. Tom couldn't make out all the words, but the tone was clear enough. The man was angry and wanted the woman gone. Tom had seen enough. He opened his truck door and stepped out into the rain. He was a big man, 6 feet 2 inches tall and strong from years of physical work. He usually wore his old cowboy hat when he went to town, and today was no exception. Between his size and the hat and the confident way he carried himself, people tended to notice when Tom Williams walked into a situation. The crowd on the sidewalk saw him coming and started to quiet down. Even the angry man stopped yelling for a moment. Tom walked straight to where the woman was kneeling in the street, not paying attention to anyone else. Up close he could see that she was young, probably in her 20s, and completely overwhelmed by whatever had happened to her. He took off his hat and knelt down beside her in the wet street. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "let me help you with that." Lisa looked up through her tears and rain-soaked hair to see a man kneeling beside her in the street. For a moment she couldn't process what was happening. After watching dozens of people stand around and stare at her humiliation, someone was actually offering to help. The man was big and solid-looking, with kind eyes and a weathered face that spoke of years spent working outdoors. He held a cowboy hat in his hands and spoke with a gentle voice that seemed completely at odds with his imposing size. "Ma'am," he said again, "let me help you with that." Lisa's first instinct was to say no. She'd been taking care of herself for so long that accepting help from a stranger felt wrong. But as she looked around at her scattered belongings getting ruined by the rain, she realized she didn't have much choice. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. Tom started carefully collecting the wet photographs that were scattered around her. He could see they were family pictures, a woman who looked like an older version of the girl beside him, holiday gatherings, birthday parties. The kind of pictures people treasure because they can't be replaced. He was careful with each one, gently shaking off the rainwater before handing them to Lisa. Some were damaged beyond saving, but others might be okay if they dried them out quickly. "These yours?" he asked softly, holding up a picture of Lisa with an older woman at what looked like a graduation ceremony. Lisa nodded, not trusting herself to speak without breaking down completely. From the sidewalk, Mr. Peterson's voice cut through the sound of the rain. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Tom looked up but didn't stop collecting Lisa's things. "Helping a lady who needs help," he said calmly. "This is none of your business," Mr. Peterson said, starting to walk toward them. "That woman was trespassing on my property." Tom stood up slowly, rising to his full height. Even without his boots, he was several inches taller than Mr. Peterson, and the years of ranch work had given him the kind of solid build that suggested he could handle himself in any situation. "Seems to me like your business is done," Tom said, his voice still calm but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "The lady's not on your property anymore." Mr. Peterson stopped walking. Something about Tom's quiet confidence made him reconsider whatever he'd been planning to say. "She owes me money," Mr. Peterson said, but with less conviction than before. "That's between you and her," Tom replied. "But right now she's sitting in a public street picking up her belongings in the rain, and I'm going to help her do that." The crowd of neighbors and passers-by had grown quiet, sensing that the situation was about to change. Tom's presence had shifted the whole dynamic. Instead of a helpless woman being bullied by an angry landlord, it was now a confrontation between two men, and everyone could see which one had the moral high ground. Tom knelt back down beside Lisa and continued gathering her things. He found her wallet, her keys, and her phone, which thankfully seemed to still be working despite getting wet. He also collected dozens of coins and crumpled bills that had been scattered when her purse broke open. "That everything?" he asked when they'd gathered what they could find. Lisa nodded, clutching the salvaged photographs to her chest. Tom helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. The stress and emotional exhaustion of the day were clearly taking their toll. "You hurt?" he asked, noticing how she was favoring her left wrist. "No, I'm okay," Lisa said automatically, though her wrist was definitely sore from where Mr. Peterson had grabbed her. Tom didn't believe her, but he didn't push the issue. Instead, he looked around at the crowd that was still watching them. "Show's over, folks," he said firmly. "Y'all can go back to your day now." Most of the neighbors started heading back to their houses, though a few continued to watch from their windows. Mr. Peterson stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer, clearly wanting to say something else, but Tom's steady gaze discouraged him from trying. Finally, the landlord turned and walked back into the apartment building, slamming the door behind him. Tom turned his attention back to Lisa, who was shivering in the rain. Her clothes were soaked through and she looked like she was about to collapse from exhaustion. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked gently. Lisa opened her mouth to say yes automatically, but the lie wouldn't come. She shook her head, fresh tears mixing with the rainwater on her face. "Family? Friends? My mom," Lisa said quietly. "But she's in a care facility recovering from cancer treatments. I can't let her see me like this." Tom nodded, understanding immediately. Pride was something he recognized, especially the kind that came from not wanting to burden the people you loved with your problems. He looked at this young woman standing in the rain with everything she owned stuffed into a broken purse, and he thought about his grandmother. She'd taken in more strays than he could count over the years, animals and people both. She'd never asked for their stories or judged them for their circumstances. She'd just seen someone who needed help and provided it. "I've got a place," Tom said simply. "Clean bed, warm food, and nobody asking questions you don't want to answer." Lisa looked at him with surprise and wariness. She'd been taught never to go anywhere with strangers, especially not men she'd just met, but she'd also been taught to recognize genuine kindness when she saw it, and something about this man felt safe. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Tom Williams," he replied, extending his hand. "I own a ranch about 20 miles outside of town." "Lisa Chen," she said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, calloused from hard work but careful not to hurt her injured wrist. "Pleased to meet you, Lisa Chen," Tom said, "though I'm sorry it's under these circumstances." Lisa looked around at the empty street, the apartment building where she'd lost her home, and the few neighbors still watching from their windows. She thought about the $47 in her wallet and the car with a quarter tank of gas. She thought about the shelters she'd researched online, all of which had waiting lists or requirements she couldn't meet. She thought about her pride and her safety and all the reasons why going home with a stranger was a terrible idea. Then, she thought about spending the night in her car in the rain with nowhere to go and no one to call. "Okay," she said quietly. Tom nodded and gestured toward his truck. "Let's get you out of this rain." As they walked to the truck, Lisa felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the sense that someone was looking out for her. She didn't know anything about this man except his name and the fact that he'd helped her when no one else would, but sometimes that was enough. Tom opened the passenger door for her and waited until she was settled before closing it gently. He walked around to the driver's side, put on his seatbelt and started the engine. "There's a towel behind your seat," he said as he pulled away from the curb, "and the heat should warm you up in a minute." Lisa found the towel and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled like hay and honest work, and for the first time all day, she felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. She looked out the window as they drove through town, watching the familiar streets disappear behind them. She was leaving everything she'd known for an uncertain future with a stranger, but somehow it felt like the right choice. Sometimes the scariest decisions turned out to be the best ones. The drive to Tom's ranch took about 30 minutes, but it felt both longer and shorter than that to Lisa. Longer because she was nervous about what she'd gotten herself into, and shorter because the comfortable silence in the truck was the most peaceful she'd felt in months. Tom didn't try to make conversation, which Lisa appreciated. He seemed to understand that she needed time to process everything that had happened. Instead, he drove carefully through the rain, occasionally pointing out landmarks or mentioning practical things like where the nearest grocery store was located. "There's a small town called Cedar Springs about 10 miles from the ranch," he said as they turned onto a county road. It's got a post office, a diner, and a general store that carries most everything you might need. Lisa nodded, looking out at the countryside rolling past. She'd lived in town her whole life and had forgotten how peaceful rural areas could be. Even in the rain, there was something calming about the wide open spaces and the absence of traffic and noise. As they drove, Tom told her a little about the ranch. His grandfather had started it in the 1940s with just a few acres and big dreams. His father had expanded it over the years, adding more land and more cattle. Now Tom ran about 200 head of cattle on 500 acres of rolling hills and pasture. "It's not fancy," he said as they turned into a long gravel driveway, "but it's peaceful." The first thing Lisa saw was the house, a modest 2-story farmhouse painted white with a wraparound porch and flower boxes under the windows. Even in the rain, it looked welcoming and well-maintained. Beyond the house, she could see several outbuildings, a large red barn, an equipment shed, and what looked like a chicken coop. Cattle dotted the visible pastures, black dots against the green grass, all looking content despite the weather. Tom parked near the front porch and turned off the engine. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you inside where it's warm." Lisa followed him up the porch steps, her wet shoes squeaking on the wooden boards. Tom opened the front door and gestured for her to go first. The inside of the house was exactly what Lisa had expected, comfortable and lived in without being fancy. The furniture was solid and practical, the kind that was built to last rather than impress. Family photos covered the mantel above a stone fireplace, and bookshelves lined one wall of the living room. "Guest rooms upstairs," Tom said, hanging his hat on a hook by the door. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Why don't you get cleaned up and into some dry clothes, and I'll see about getting some food together." Lisa realized she was still dripping rainwater on his hardwood floors. "I'm sorry, I'm making a mess." "Floors have seen worse," Tom said with a slight smile. "Go on up. Take your time." The guest room was simple but comfortable. A double bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser with an old mirror, and a window that looked out over the pastures. It was clean and welcoming, with fresh towels laid out on the bed. Lisa sat down heavily on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. This morning she'd woken up in her own apartment. Now she was sitting in a stranger's house 20 miles from town with nowhere else to go. She should have been terrified. Everything she'd been taught about stranger danger said this was a terrible idea. But sitting in this quiet room, listening to Tom moving around in the kitchen downstairs, she felt safer than she had in months. There was something about Tom Williams that inspired trust. Maybe it was the way he'd knelt down in the rain to help her without being asked. Maybe it was the gentle way he'd handled her ruined photographs. Or maybe it was just the fact that he'd offered help without asking for anything in return. Lisa took a hot shower, washing away the rain and the stress of the day. When she came back to the guest room, she found that Tom had left a stack of clean clothes outside her door, a flannel shirt and a pair of sweatpants that were way too big for her, but were warm and dry. When she came downstairs, she found Tom in the kitchen stirring something that smelled amazing. The kitchen was the heart of the house, with a large wooden table, open shelving displaying mismatched dishes, and windows that would probably offer a great view of the ranch when it wasn't raining. "Beef stew," he said when he saw her. "My grandmother's recipe. It's pretty simple, but it'll warm you up." Lisa sat down at the kitchen table and watched him work. There was something peaceful about the way he moved around the kitchen, confident and unhurried. He cut thick slices of homemade bread and set the table for two. "You made this bread?" Lisa asked, surprised. "Learned how when my dad got sick," Tom said. "Figured I better know how to take care of myself." The stew was delicious, rich and hearty, and exactly what Lisa needed after the day she'd had. They ate mostly in comfortable silence, with Tom occasionally mentioning something about the ranch or asking gentle questions about her background. Lisa found herself telling him about her job as a substitute teacher, about how much she loved working with kids, and about her mother's battle with cancer. She didn't go into detail about the eviction or the money problems, but Tom seemed to understand without needing the whole story. "Teaching's important work," he said when she mentioned how difficult it could be to make ends meet on a substitute's salary. "Kids need good people looking out for them." After dinner, Tom showed her around the main floor of the house. The living room had a comfortable couch facing the fireplace, which he lit to chase away the dampness from the rain. The study was lined with books about ranching, local history, and classic literature. You read a lot? Lisa asked, looking at the packed shelves. Not much else to do in the evenings, Tom said. No cable TV out here and the internet's not great, but I like books anyway. They're good company. Lisa understood that. During her mother's treatments, she'd spent countless hours in hospital waiting rooms with nothing but books to keep her company. As the evening wore on, Lisa felt some of the tension leaving her body. The warmth from the fireplace, the full stomach, and the simple comfort of being in a safe place were working better than any medicine. I should probably explain, she said finally, settling into the couch with a cup of tea Tom had made. I'm not usually the kind of person who goes home with strangers. Tom nodded from his chair across from her. I figured as much. You seem like someone who's usually pretty careful. I am. But today... She trailed off, not sure how to explain the desperation that had led her to accept his offer. Today you needed help, and I was able to provide it. Tom said simply, nothing wrong with that, but you don't even know me. How do you know I'm not some kind of criminal or con artist? Tom was quiet for a moment, considering her question. I suppose I don't, he said finally. But I saw how you handled those photographs in the rain, like they were the most important things in the world. I saw how you talked about your mom. People don't fake that kind of love. Lisa felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't from despair. Thank you, she said quietly. Not just for dinner in the room, but for seeing me as a person instead of just a problem to be solved. Everyone deserves to be treated like a person, Tom said, especially when they're going through a hard time. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside the farmhouse, Lisa felt warmer and safer than she had in months. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, she had a roof over her head and the kindness of a stranger who'd restored her faith in humanity. Lisa woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of roosters crowing in the distance. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then everything came flooding back. The eviction, the rain, and Tom Williams lifting her out of what felt like the worst day of her life. She could smell coffee and bacon cooking downstairs, and when she looked at the clock on the nightstand, she was shocked to see it was almost 9 in the morning. She couldn't remember the last time she'd slept so late or so peacefully. Lisa got dressed quickly and headed downstairs, expecting to find Tom in the kitchen. Instead, she found a note on the table next to a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast that was still warm. Good morning, the note read in neat handwriting. Had to check on the cattle early. Help yourself to coffee and breakfast. Back around noon. Make yourself at home. Tom, make yourself at home. Lisa sat down with her breakfast and looked around the kitchen, trying to remember the last time anyone had told her to make herself at home. It was such a simple phrase, but it carried a lot of weight when you'd just lost your actual home. After breakfast, Lisa explored the house more thoroughly. In the daylight, she could see details she'd missed the night before. Family photos showed 3 generations of Williams men, all with the same kind eyes and strong build as Tom. The house was clean but lived in, comfortable rather than perfect. What struck her most was how organized everything was, except for one room that served as Tom's office. Papers were scattered across a desk, bills were stacked in no particular order, and file folders overflowed with documents that looked like they hadn't been sorted in years. Lisa's teacher instincts kicked in. She'd always been good at organizing things, and the chaos in Tom's office made her fingers itch to start sorting and filing. When Tom returned around lunchtime, he found Lisa sitting at his desk with papers spread out in neat piles around her. I hope you don't mind, she said quickly, standing up when she heard his boots on the porch. I was just looking around and I noticed your paperwork was a little disorganized. Tom finished with a grin. That's being polite about it. I could help you sort through it if you want, Lisa offered. I'm good with paperwork and records. It's something I could do to pay you back for your kindness. Tom looked at the neat piles she'd already created. Bills in one stack, ranch records in another, tax documents in a third. In just a few hours, she'd brought more order to his office than he'd managed in months. You don't owe me anything, he said. But if you want to tackle that mess, I won't stop you. I've been putting it off for way too long. Lisa smiled for the first time since arriving at the ranch. I'd like to help. It'll give me something useful to do. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Tom would go out early to tend to the cattle and take care of ranch work, while Lisa worked on organizing his paperwork and records. In the afternoons, he'd show her around the property, explaining how everything worked. Lisa was surprised by how much she enjoyed learning about ranch life. She'd never been around large animals before, but Tom was patient in teaching her how to approach the cattle and what to watch for to tell if they were healthy and content. Cattle are pretty simple, he explained as they walked through one of the pastures. They need grass, water, and to feel safe. Treat them well and they'll trust you. It sounds like teaching, Lisa said, watching a group of calves play in the afternoon sun. Kids need the same things: food, safety, and someone they can trust. Tom looked at her with interest. You miss it? Teaching? Every day, Lisa admitted. I loved that job. I loved the kids and helping them learn new things. It's hard to explain to people who haven't done it, but there's nothing like the moment when a child finally understands something they've been struggling with. Why don't you go back? Lisa's smile faded. It's complicated. Substitute teaching doesn't pay enough to live on. And I lost my permanent position when I had to take time off for my mom's treatments. Most schools want teachers who can commit to being there every day. Tom nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense, I guess. But it seems like a waste. Someone with your skills not being able to use them. As the weeks passed, Lisa threw herself into organizing Tom's ranch records. What she found was a successful operation that was being held back by poor record keeping. Tom was an excellent rancher who knew his cattle and his land better than anyone. But he was terrible at the business side of things. Look at this, Lisa said one evening, spreading papers across the kitchen table. You're not charging enough for your cattle. The going rate is at least 20% higher than what you're getting. Tom looked at the numbers she'd written down. I've been selling to the same buyer for years. He's always been fair with me. He might have been fair 5 years ago, Lisa said gently, but prices have gone up and you haven't adjusted. You're leaving money on the table. She showed him market reports she'd found online, price comparisons with other ranchers in the area, and a detailed breakdown of his costs versus his income. It was clear that Tom could be making significantly more money with just a few changes to how he marketed his cattle. You've been doing this for weeks, Tom said, looking at all the work she'd put into his records. This is way more than just organizing paperwork. Lisa shrugged. I like solving problems, and you're not charging me rent or asking for anything in return for letting me stay here. This is the least I can do. But it was more than that, and they both knew it. Lisa was starting to feel invested in the ranch's success. She was learning about cattle prices and feed costs and land management in a way that felt meaningful. For the first time in months, she felt useful. Tom was noticing changes, too. Coming home to find Lisa working at the kitchen table, ready to share what she discovered that day, made the house feel more alive than it had since his father passed away. She brought energy and enthusiasm to problems he'd been ignoring for too long. You know, he said one evening as they went over the monthly expenses together, you're good at this, the business side of ranching. Have you ever thought about it as a career? Lisa laughed. I'm a substitute teacher who just got evicted. I don't think I'm qualified to give business advice. Maybe not, Tom said, but you've increased my potential income by 20% in 3 weeks. That's not luck, that's skill. Lisa felt a warm glow at the compliment, but also a familiar worry. Tom, I need to start looking for my own place soon. I can't keep imposing on your hospitality forever. Tom was quiet for a long moment. The truth was, he didn't want her to leave. The ranch felt more like a home with her in it, and not just because she was helping with the paperwork. Lisa brought a perspective and energy that he'd been missing without realizing it. What if you didn't have to leave? He said finally. Lisa looked up from the papers she'd been sorting. What do you mean? I mean, what if this arrangement became more permanent? You help me run the business side of the ranch and you have a place to stay and a steady income. Lisa stared at him. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, Tom said. I handle the cattle and the land. You handle the business and the records. We split the profits. It was a generous offer. More generous than Lisa had any right to expect. But it also felt right in a way that surprised her. She'd found something here that she'd been missing in her old life. A sense of purpose and contribution that went beyond just paying bills. Can I think about it? She asked. Take all the time you need, Tom said, but I hope you'll say yes. As autumn settled over the ranch, Lisa found herself falling into a rhythm she'd never experienced before. The partnership with Tom was working better than either of them had imagined. Her business skills complemented his ranching expertise perfectly, and the ranch was more profitable than it had been in years. But something else was growing between them too, something neither of them had planned for. It started with small moments. The way Tom would bring her coffee in the morning when she was working on the books. How Lisa would have lunch ready when he came in from the pastures, dirty and tired but always grateful. The comfortable conversations they'd have in the evenings, sharing stories about their families and their dreams. Lisa learned that Tom's quiet nature hid a sharp sense of humor and a deep kindness that extended far beyond his rescue of her that rainy day. He regularly helped elderly neighbors with repairs and maintenance they couldn't handle themselves. When the Murphy family's barn burned down, Tom organized a community effort to rebuild it, contributing both labor and materials without expecting anything in return. "You do this kind of thing often?" Lisa asked one Saturday as they drove home from helping install the Murphys' new roof. "Do what?" Tom asked, genuinely puzzled. "Help people. Fix their problems. Be the person everyone calls when they need something." Tom shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "People help each other out here. It's just what you do." But Lisa was learning that not everyone was as generous with their time and resources as Tom Williams. He had a reputation in the community as someone you could count on, and she was beginning to understand why. Tom, meanwhile, was discovering sides of Lisa that impressed him more each day. Her intelligence and quick grasp of ranch business were obvious, but he was also learning about her fierce loyalty and protective instincts. When Mrs. Henderson at the general store made a snide comment about Tom taking in strays, Lisa's response was swift and pointed. "Tom Williams has more integrity in his little finger than most people have in their whole body," she told the older woman. "And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the one with the problem." Tom had never had anyone defend him like that, and it meant more to him than he knew how to express. Their working relationship deepened into friendship, and friendship slowly blossomed into something more. They spent their evenings on the porch, talking about everything and nothing while watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. They worked side by side during the day, Lisa handling correspondence and market research while Tom managed the cattle and the land. The ranch was thriving under their combined efforts. Lisa had negotiated better prices for their cattle and found new markets for their beef. She'd also discovered that Tom had been significantly undercharging for the hay he sold to other ranchers, and correcting that alone had increased their income by thousands of dollars. "You're a natural at this," Tom told her one evening as they reviewed the quarterly reports. "I never would have figured out half of this stuff on my own. And I never would have known the difference between a bull and a steer without you," Lisa replied with a laugh. "We make a good team." They did make a good team in more ways than either of them had expected. But as comfortable as they'd become with each other, there was an unspoken tension growing between them. Lingering glances, hands that touched a moment longer than necessary when passing papers, conversations that went deeper than just business or friendship. Lisa found herself looking forward to Tom's return from the pastures each day. She loved watching him work with the cattle, moving with confidence and patience among animals that trusted him completely. There was something attractive about a man who was gentle with creatures that depended on him for care. Tom found himself making excuses to spend time in the house during the day, ostensibly to check on some paperwork, but really just to be near Lisa. He loved hearing her laugh at something she'd read or watching, her face light up when she solved a particularly challenging problem with the books. The realization that their feelings had moved beyond friendship came gradually, then all at once. It was early December and they'd been working together for nearly 3 months. Lisa had been helping Tom string Christmas lights around the porch when she slipped on the wet steps. Tom caught her before she could fall, and for a moment they stood there in each other's arms, looking into each other's eyes. "Lisa," Tom said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," she whispered back. "I feel it too." But instead of acting on the moment, they stepped apart, both suddenly uncertain. What they'd found together was too important to risk with complications. "Maybe we should talk about this," Lisa said, her heart racing. Tom nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, we should." They went inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same place where they'd shared so many meals and conversations over the past months. But this felt different, more serious. "I don't want to mess this up," Tom said finally. "What we have here, this partnership, it's working really well. I don't want to complicate things." Lisa felt a flash of disappointment even though she understood his caution. "You're right," she said. "We should keep things professional." But even as they agreed to maintain their business relationship, both of them knew something had fundamentally changed. The awareness was there now, humming between them like electricity. Over the next few weeks, they tried to go back to their comfortable routine, but it wasn't the same. They were more careful around each other, more formal. The easy intimacy they'd developed was replaced by polite distance. It was making them both miserable. Finally, on Christmas Eve, as they decorated the tree in the living room, a tradition Tom had maintained since his grandmother's time, Lisa couldn't stand it anymore. "This is ridiculous," she said, hanging an ornament with more force than necessary. "What's ridiculous?" Tom asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "Us, pretending like nothing has changed, walking on eggshells around each other." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I came here with nothing, Tom. You gave me shelter and safety and purpose, and I'm grateful for all of that. But what I'm feeling for you now has nothing to do with gratitude." Tom set down the box of ornaments he'd been holding. "Lisa, I love you," she said simply. "I love your kindness and your integrity, and the way you see the best in people. I love how patient you are with the animals, and how you always know the right thing to do. I love that you rescued me when I needed it most, but I especially love that you see me as an equal partner now." Tom crossed the room in 3 quick strides and took her hands in his. "I love you too," he said, the words tumbling out like they'd been held back too long. "I've been fighting it because I didn't want you to feel obligated or trapped, but I can't pretend anymore. I don't want this to be just a business arrangement. I want you to stay not because you need a place to live, but because you want to build a life here with me." Lisa felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in months they were tears of joy rather than despair. "I want that too," she whispered, "more than anything." When Tom kissed her under the glow of the Christmas tree lights, surrounded by the warmth and comfort of the home they'd built together, Lisa knew she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Not just love, but partnership. Not just rescue, but renewal. What had started as the worst day of her life had led her to the best thing that had ever happened to her. 2 years later, Lisa stood in front of the mirror in the guest room that had once been her refuge, adjusting the vintage wedding dress that had belonged to Tom's grandmother. The delicate lace and pearl buttons had been carefully preserved in a cedar chest for decades, waiting for the right moment to be worn again. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," her mother said from the doorway, tears already threatening to ruin her makeup. Lisa turned to smile at the woman who'd fought her own battle and won. The cancer treatments had been successful, and her mother was now healthy and strong, living in a small apartment in town and volunteering at the local literacy center. "I wish Dad could be here to see this," Lisa said, thinking of her father who'd passed away when she was in college. "He can see it," her mother said firmly, "and he's so proud of you, of how you took care of me, and of how you've built this beautiful life." Lisa looked out the window at the ranch that had become her world. The pastures were green and dotted with cattle. The barn was freshly painted, and everything looked prosperous and well-maintained. More importantly, it felt like home in a way nowhere else ever had. The past 2 years had been the happiest of her life. The partnership with Tom had evolved into something far beyond what either of them had imagined. Together, they'd expanded the ranch operation, adding a small herd of sheep and a successful farmer's market business, selling fresh eggs and vegetables. Lisa had also found a way to return to teaching. The local school district had created a position for her, a combination of substitute teaching and educational consulting that allowed her the flexibility to help run the ranch while still working with children. But the most amazing change was how the community had embraced their relationship. The same neighbors who'd watched her humiliation on that terrible rainy day now celebrated her success and happiness. People who'd once seen her as an outsider now considered her part of the fabric of the community. Mrs. Henderson from the general store had even apologized for her earlier rudeness, admitting that she'd been wrong about Lisa and that Tom had clearly found his perfect match. "Are you ready?" Lisa's mother asked, adjusting the simple bouquet of wildflowers that Lisa had picked from the ranch that morning. Lisa nodded, taking one last look in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was different from the one who'd knelt in the rain 2 years ago. This woman was confident, loved, and surrounded by purpose. She'd learned that sometimes the worst moments in life were just detours leading to something better. The wedding ceremony was held in the small church in town, with what felt like the entire community in attendance. Tom stood at the altar looking handsome in his best suit, but with the same kind eyes and gentle smile that had first made Lisa trust him. Pastor Williams, no relation to Tom, despite the shared name, performed the ceremony with warmth and humor, speaking about love that grows from friendship and partnerships that strengthen over time. "Tom and Lisa," he said, "you've shown us all what it means to build something beautiful together. You've taken individual strengths and combined them into something stronger than either of you could achieve alone." When it came time for their vows, Tom spoke about how Lisa had brought light and purpose into his life, how she'd taught him that the ranch was more than just land and cattle. It was a foundation for building dreams together. Lisa talked about how Tom had rescued her in more ways than he'd ever know, how he'd shown her that real strength came from gentleness, and that home wasn't a place but a person you chose to build a life with. There wasn't a dry eye in the church when they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that Tom had ordered from a jeweler in the city, inscribed with coordinates marking the exact spot where they'd first met. After the ceremony, the reception was held at the ranch with tables set up in the pasture and lights strung between the trees. The whole community pitched in to make it special. Mrs. Murphy provided flowers from her garden, the Martinez family catered the dinner, and the high school band provided music for dancing under the stars. As the evening progressed, Lisa found herself surrounded by friends and neighbors who'd become like family. She watched Tom laughing with his old friends, completely at ease and happier than she'd ever seen him. "You done good, girl," said Bill Martinez from the feed store, raising his glass in a toast. "That man's been alone too long. He needed someone like you to remind him how to be happy." "I needed him too," Lisa replied, watching her new husband demonstrate proper line dancing technique to a group of children, "more than I ever realized." Later, as the party wound down and the last guests headed home, Lisa and Tom found themselves alone on the porch where they'd spent so many evenings talking and planning and falling in love. "So," Tom said, pulling her close as they watched the stars appear in the clear night sky, "how does it feel to be Mrs. Williams?" "Like coming home," Lisa said simply. "Like everything in my life led me to this moment." They'd talked about their future plans extensively. The ranch would continue to grow and prosper under their joint management. Lisa would keep teaching part-time, and they'd both stay involved in community activities that mattered to them. But they'd also discussed something else, their desire to help other people who found themselves in desperate situations like Lisa had been in. They'd set aside part of the guest house as temporary housing for women and families who needed a safe place to stay while getting back on their feet. "I keep thinking about that day," Lisa said, settling into Tom's arms, "when I was sitting in the rain with everything I owned scattered in the street. I felt so alone and hopeless, and now?" Tom asked, though he already knew the answer. "Now I know that sometimes when you lose everything, you make room for something better. I lost my apartment and my security and my pride that day, but I found you. I found this life. I found myself." Tom kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair and the happiness that seemed to radiate from her. "I used to think the ranch was complete," he said. "I had the land, the cattle, a good business, but I was missing the most important part." "What was that?" "Someone to share it with. Someone who saw the same possibilities I did and wanted to build them together." As they sat there on their wedding night, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch settling down for the evening, Lisa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The eviction that had seemed like the end of her world had actually been the beginning of a new and better chapter. She'd learned that strength sometimes looked like accepting help when you needed it. That pride was less important than survival. That sometimes the scariest decisions led to the most beautiful outcomes. Most importantly, she'd learned that love could grow from the simplest acts of kindness, and that home wasn't a place you lived but a life you built with someone who saw the best in you even when you couldn't see it yourself. The ranch would always be special to both of them, not just as a business or a piece of property, but as the place where two people found each other and decided to create something beautiful together. It was where a cowboy taught a city girl about cattle and land management, and where a teacher showed a rancher that numbers and planning could be just as important as instinct and experience. But most of all, it was where they learned that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. and that love has a way of growing in the spaces between heartbreak and hope.